Hey, everybody. Good to have you here as we are looking at day 258 of our 2020 Focus Bible reading, where we are looking at the book of Revelation, chapter 18. And we've just come out of the description of this, um, well, what they call the prostitute. When I was growing up, it was the whore of Babylon, which is stark words, but that was the idea, and it was the idea that Rome is the city being described. It isn't Babylon because it's not looking back at the past. It's saying this is what's coming, and it's also not looking super into the future so that Babylon can be just any nation. No, no, it's been defined um, as Rome, as the city that sits on seven hills, that has all of these other nations bowing down to it, that has put itself in the place of God and is now persecuting the people of God. And so now we transition from that kind of scene. It says this, and it starts out in chapter 18, verse 1. It talks about how that he sees an angel coming down. So now he is located on earth as he sees this angel coming down, and they're about to talk about the destruction of this great nation, which they are calling Babylon the Great. And Babylon the Great, that's what Nebuchadnezzar said about Babylon, this great Babylon that he had created. And obviously that was destined for destruction. So this new iteration of Babylon called Rome is destined for destruction. And this is what we read. It says, "After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted, 'Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons, and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, 'Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Give back to her as she has given. Pay her back double for what she has done. Pour her a double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she boasts, 'I sit enthroned as queen. I am not a widow. I will never mourn.' Therefore, in one day her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. Then, when the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. Terrified at her torment, they will stand far off and cry, 'Woe! Woe to you, great city, you mighty city of Babylon! In 1 hour your doom has come.' The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, fine linen, purple silk, and scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble. Cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh, and frankincense, of wine and olive oil, of fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and human beings sold as slaves. They will say, the fruit you longed for is gone from you. All your luxury and splendor have vanished, never to be recovered. The merchants who sold these things and gained their wealth from her will stand far off, terrified at her torment. They will weep and mourn and cry out, 'Woe, woe to you, great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. In 1 hour such great wealth has been brought to ruin.' Every sea captain and all who travel by ship, the sailors, and all who earn their living from the sea will stand far off. When they see the smoke of her burning, they will exclaim, 'Was there ever a city like this great city?' They will throw dust on their heads and with weeping and mourning cry out, 'Woe, woe to you, great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour she has been brought to ruin. Rejoice over her, you heavens. Rejoice, you people of God. Rejoice, apostles and prophets, for God has judged her with the judgment she imposed on you.'" Then a mighty angel picked up a boulder, the size of a large millstone, and threw it into the sea, and said, with such violence, the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. The music of harpists and musicians, pipers and trumpeters, will never be heard in you again. No worker or of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a millstone will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of bridegroom and bride will never be heard in you again. Your merchants were the world's important people. By your magic spell, all the nations were led astray. In her was found the blood of the prophets and of God's holy people, of all who have been slaughtered on the earth. All right, so this is just pretty much just a straightforward description of what's going to happen. And honestly, in this one, it's amazing because as you go through the book of Revelation, you have these mystical creatures and you have these visions, and you have beasts and dragons and just otherworldly descriptions of what's going on. In this chapter, it's almost as if John is reverting back to the Old Testament prophets, because in this particular section, you actually could drop this in Isaiah. You could drop this in any of the Old Testament prophets who were prophesying doom. You can go to Amos. You're going to find passages that look like this, talking about either Israel or talking about Assyria or talking about other nations that are going to rise up and be opponents to Israel and the people of God. And this is the kind of language that is used to describe them. And as a matter of fact, if you were to go through, you're going to find different places in the Old Testament that are actually represented here by the language that John's using in this description. And so it's almost like all the fantasy side of it, all the crazy apocalyptic imagery now gets brought down to reality, and the reality is it's going to be bad, and that Babylon or Rome is going to be thoroughly destroyed. It is not going to exist in any way, shape, and form in the way that it does in that moment. And you have to understand that was an impossible thought for people who were living during that time. It's all they ever knew was this power and empire of Rome, because by the time John's writing this, the people he's writing to, Rome has been in charge. Rome has been in charge for a long, long time. It was in charge before their parents and grandparents were born. It's like you had this, just this power of Rome, and it just seemed like it was never going to end, which is partly why Revelation was written, to remind them, no, God's still on his throne. It doesn't matter what earthly power seems to be dominant at the time. God's the one in charge. And when a nation sins against God by going after God's people, God will do something about it. It will not remain that way forever. It cannot. God will not allow it. His justice will win out. And that's what we read in this. And what we end up having is the final woe. There were three woes that the eagle or vulture cried out when we were reading back chapters ago. We never got the third woe. Well, welcome to the third woe, and it's a threefold woe. That's exactly what it is. You have three woes. Now, this is going to match up when we jump to the next section and we're actually given three hallelujahs. That's where we're headed in chapter 19. So again, these are meant to be together. Don't just simply, kind of pull them apart. They're really meant to be together. It's just unfortunately for cataloging and research, we have verses and chapters that aren't necessarily as well defined as they probably could be. But anyway, that's where we're headed with what's going on. Now, there was one other thing as we were kind of reading here. There is in the middle of this chapter, and it says, "Then I heard a voice from heaven say, 'Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes.'" That's where this section stops in talking about God's people. In other words, it's not saying, get out of Rome. They weren't going to make it out of the Roman Empire. There wasn't any place that they could really get to that was out of Rome's reach. What he's saying here is don't be like them. Don't fall in with them. Don't share in the things that Rome is doing. In other words, fight the urge to conform to this culture. Be not conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's what's at play here. Then when you get to verse 6, this is not a command to the people to get back at Rome. This is now directing this comment towards God. It's almost like, cheering on what God's going to do, because God has remembered her crimes. And then it's almost like he's going to give back to her as she has given. Pay her back double for what she has done. Pour her a double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she had herself. In her heart she boasts, and it goes through that section. And it says, she will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord who judges her. So this last section isn't about human rebellion against Rome. This is about God's judgment against Rome, and it's going to be thorough. And so that's what we're gonna go from this threefold woe. We're going to move to chapter 19 and see the three hallelujahs. So that's it for today. We will see you tomorrow for chapter 19.